Welcome to Let's Talk Food Security. Today we're going to deconstruct key issues that surrounds food security matters, whether they are global issues, whether they are more closer to home. We'll have here with us three members of the panel to discuss this very, very important issue with us. To my right, I have Yang Berbahagia Profesor Datin Paduka Dr. Fatimah Aisyad from Institut Kajian Dasar Pertanian dan Makanan Universiti Putra Malaysia. And on her right, we have Yang Berusaha Dr. Haniza Khalid. She is the Senior Development Economist for UNDP Malaysia. And also we have Yang Berusaha Puan Siti Salwahani Muhammad Nazir from the Ministry of Agriculture and Food Industries. Welcome, ladies, to Food Talk. Food security. So it's a very interesting topic, and I think that this is something that the focus of the world has channeled, and I think this is the right time it's never a right and a wrong time to discuss this issue, as this concerns human lives, it concerns our population. But let me start off with the first question, and I perhaps Dr. Haniza can address them. We are now just 8 years away from 2030, and 2030 is supposed to be the key milestone for the world to achieve Agenda 2030. And why is this relevant? Is because one of the 17 SDG is target number 2, goal number 2, which is zero hunger. Now, would you be able to share with us exactly how has the world come anywhere close to achieving this target? Seeing that many countries are still facing very severe food security issues. Some countries are experiencing severe famine, especially the vulnerable groups. Maybe not so much closer to home, but there's still challenges. Perhaps you could share with us the genesis of this kind of situation.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm very honored to be here talking about this very important issue. If I may, can I go back to the genesis of the SDGs? This was back in 2014, 2015, where representatives from 193 countries came together and tried to face the future. And the future that they saw was not very encouraging. They were not optimistic about the future. There was food shortages where there's actually enough food produce. There were environmental disasters when actually many of them could have been stopped by man. They were originated from man-made actions. So they came together and decided that this is the future that we want instead, which is encapsulated into the 17 goals. And as you said, the most important goal, which is one of the most important goals, which is set at number 2, and no poverty, and then zero hunger. And food security speaks to zero hunger very, very directly. But today, as you said, 8 years left to 2030, we have 8.9 people food insecure, close to hunger. I mean, 8.9% of the population is already suffering from hunger, and that number could turn to 10% in 2030. So we are backsliding instead of progressing, despite all these good intentions and the clear blueprint that each country has taken up for their own population. Food prices, according to World Food Programme, has risen by 25% in just 1 year, between 2021 to 2020. 2020 to 2021, cereal prices have gone up 75%. So the urgency is never been this intense, and it is a multilateral problem, because it is not a country's own production or own supply chain constraint that we are looking at. It is very much a multilateral and international problem. It's a climate change problem beyond our lens. In fact, it's the global heating. It is the water issue. It is precipitation or weather, and so on. So it's very complex, and it's no longer a problem that we can grasp or touch and feel anymore. It requires very creative solutions as well. So here we are today with that. Those are some of the statistics I can bring up.
Thank you, Doctor. But perhaps, Prof, may I even try to pick your mind a little on this? It seems that I don't like to use this term. I don't like to use that. The future is bleak. I don't think I want to be that pessimistic. Although many of us are very, very worried that the trajectory doesn't seem like it's going towards the direction that we would want to head towards. But what do you think? Do you think there's still hope yet? Do you think that there's still some room, given that 8 years we have, left to reach this target? Do you think there's still room for us to improve? What can you share with us?
All right, you're asking about what the future should be or what it will be, right? So this depends on many factors. And as mentioned by Dr. Niza just now, the future is very complex, and whether it's going to be bleak or good prospect or business as usual or constant, I guess it depends on many factors, and we are part of it. The whole world is part of it through our policy as well as our effort in making sure that food is enough to the population. And what matters are collective effort by every country of the world, rich of world, to make sure that food production are enough for their own country. Of course, at the global level, the FAO and the various agencies have to sit down and make some future scenarios. And when you make future scenarios or scenario buildings, bleak is one of the alternatives. Bleak means maybe we make on the assumptions that climate change is going to be worse, the temperature is going to increase, and the war will not end, and maybe China may do something, in the ASEAN region, we don't know. So you have to factor in all these factors. Yeah, we have seen that under the current crisis, there are three important C's that have caused this tragedy to the world. 3 C's, that is COVID-19, yes. COVID-19 through the pandemic and the mitigation measures, particularly on the supply chain, has resulted in increase in logistic costs as well as domestically increase in marketing costs and problems with regards to labor movement. And the other C is, of course, conflict of Russia and Ukraine. And this has resulted in the worst situation the world has ever experienced, meaning the increase in price of petrol as well as gas, and this has affected the prices of fertilizer. Prices of fertilizer has increased more than 100%, and we have seen our farmers suffered a lot because of cost increase, including our production of chicken. I mean, chicken is about the self-sufficiency is more than 100 plus, but they couldn't withstand the threat of increase in cost. They have to ask subsidies from the government, right? And that is chicken, one of our best sector. And the third C is climate change. Yeah? So COVID-19, conflict, and climate change, these three systems have converged and produced the biggest crisis the whole world is facing now. So in the future, if past determines the future, so we cannot kind of ignore these three factors. Yeah, the conflict, the climate change, as well as, of course, COVID. Bill Gates have projected that there might be 1 or 2 more pandemic. Hopefully we can be much better in addressing another pandemic in the future. So in the scenario building, we have to factor in bleak situation. And if we want the whole world to be food secure, what are the factors needed to ensure food security? And that involves improving production capacity of everyone. For example, Africa holds about, I think, 60% of the available land for food, but it is only utilized less than 20%. So Africa holds the potential for food production in the world, as well as ASEAN countries, Asian countries as well. We are underproduced, particularly Malaysia. So the whole world have to look into their food production and do something, right? Do something, meaning R&D and improving their capacity in terms of producing a sustainable food production. And don't forget, 2021, UN, United Nations and FAO have identified the importance of food sustainability, resiliency, and of course equity for everyone. So these are the mantra for all of us on the earth to work for our future.
Thank you so much, Prof. So many important takeaways from what you've just said. The 3 C's pillars that are major contributing factors to what we are seeing now, and how the circumstances we have all arrived at definitely plays a major role. But also, as Dr. Haniza, you have pointed out that there are multifaceted problems, multifaceted challenges that require very creative approaches to overcome them. I mean, I don't think we can overcome those problems, those challenges in its entirety or completely, but I think it does provide some kind of leeway for us to explore, given the untapped aspects that we have not worked or focused much on previously. So on this standpoint, Puan Salwa, perhaps you might be able to share with us perhaps some innovative approaches that the government of Malaysia is planning to adopt or has adopted in trying to find ways where we in Malaysia can better improve our food security situation. Do we have such problems, or are our problems a lot less severe? Maybe you can share with us some of these things.
Thank you very much. For Malaysia, I think the key point is that your response to the crisis. So like rightly mentioned by Prof. Fatimah just now, everybody was taken aback by COVID-19. Everybody was taken aback by the war, with the increase of crops, prices of fertilizers and pesticides, and now climate change. So the key to that is, what is our response? So the government has been trying to act proactively towards these changes, and you can see that in our dasar, our policies that we have crafted and implemented. Though we cannot see the results, but the planning and the implementation is key towards responding to this crisis. For example, our National Agri-Food Policy 2.0, it rightly touches, it has 10 SDG goals that we are trying to cater in that policy. So it had end poverty, maritime, livelihood of fishers, equitability, participation of women, children, participation of women and indigenous people in the society, in the whole value chain. So it includes all these goals or way forward that we are envisioning, like the United Nations is envisioning what we want in the future, for a better future. We're not trying to go for the bleak kind of scenario. So we put in the action plans that we want to achieve in the future for the quality of life for the people in Malaysia. So this as our, I would say, our preparation towards the future. So we are focusing on things like sustainable agriculture. We are investing a lot on research and development so that we can invest in methodologies or production system that can address the issue of climate change, to increase yield with view of like very high input prices. And also internationally, we are trying to create bilateral relationships with countries that can provide us the things that we require. For example, technical expertise, or the inputs that we need into turning our products into value-added products that we can use in our own domestic market, or to further export that brings the revenue to our country. So basically, government is trying a lot with lots of our policies. We have also our national committee that sits on and talks about food security policies, and we have inputs from people like Prof. Fatima. We also have inputs from UNDG, UN, FAO, and we are also a member of many other international organizations such as the International Plant Protection Convention and WTO, World Animal Health Organization. So they are also talking about the same thing: sustainable development, sustainable agriculture. And those are the things that make us on the right path, looking forward and moving forward.
Thank you, Consalwa. Looks like the government has come up with various innovative approaches to fill in the gap that we already might have identified as we go along, and more so since the pandemic. Those teething problems we had previously became more and more prominent with the pandemic because of various problems that we may have faced with the supply chain disruptions, the increased cost of logistics. In fact, I have seen that some countries face problems where they had yields, but those crops had to be destroyed because of the movement restrictions. No one was allowed to leave and actually harvest their crops, and this may have well been a contributing factor. But let's just try and take a few steps back a little bit, and in a global scale. Perhaps Dr. Haniza may shed some light into this. Has the UN done enough to help member states overcome some of these key problems that we are already hearing? We can't do much with the pandemic. I mean, this is something that this is outside the control for governments. But moving forward, we're 2 years past the pandemic. It's not yet over, but has the UN been able to sufficiently provide the kind of guidance to its member states in trying to bridge certain difficulties, in trying to find more immediate solutions to the problems that we see, whether that is to facilitate partnerships between countries or between countries and other entities. If the UN has done so, perhaps you can share with us what those things are and whether it has worked or not.
If I may just go one step back to the issue of conflict. The conflict is not just about Ukraine, and as we know, Ukraine and Russia together, they produce 40-30% of grain production, right? 80% of the vegetable oils, certain type of sunflower vegetable oils and all that. So and now what we're seeing in Ukraine is not that the production has entirely ceased, but the railroads has been destroyed. They are even putting mines in the farms, so that makes it's very difficult to continue farming. So this is not just a problem of productivity that has been severely jeopardized, but the issue is actually more on distribution and transportation. The same thing with gas. They're putting a lot of gas pipelines at risk now because of the war. And then we also must remember zero COVID policy in China has also dampened productivity and also trade. You remember, I think a few months ago, when people showed the number of ships waiting at the port just to distribute grains and bring grains into, So this kind of, in fact, according to FAO, the production of food in aggregate is still more than the food demand. In that sense, in aggregate. So we really think this is an issue of transportation, distribution, and so on. And on top of that, after COVID, the lockdown has been lifted. Demand surged upwards. So you have transportation problem, you have demand surging upward spike, And you also have the climate change acting up, climate events increasing. So what are the response, or the international response? First is we increased, not just UN, World Bank and all the many international finance institutions develop food assistance program. Okay, food assistance program can be two types. What they give directly to the through international NGOs, to schools or to villages. The other one is, of course, to give to the government so that they can build their own cash assistance programs. So that's one, food assistance and also cash assistance. And in Ukraine, in conflict areas or where there is transportation bottleneck, some countries are even helping to rebuild the transportation linkages. But on the longer term or medium term, we really need to address the structural issues in food production, which Prof will definitely talk about more later on. What are the structural issues, even in Malaysia, in terms of the aging population, use of land, optimal use of land? How do we create more land without deforestation? Right, so there's an issue there. So how do we use marginal lands, for example, land without enough water, irrigation? How to make our resources work to the maximum forests instead of increasing the resources that we use and depleting our overall resource stock? So these are some of, and it requires a lot of help because a lot of it requires investment, and investment does not come from the internal fiscal capacity of most governments that we're talking about, like you talk about Africa. It won't come from the fiscal revenues of the African countries. It must come from international action. So there's G7, for instance, in May, they established the Global Alliance for Food Security, and they've pulled a lot of funds together. There's always the World Bank, the IMF, the UN and UNDP donors programs that are addressing this food system structural issues in the long run as well. But changes happen at the rate that it once happened, and in different countries they happen very the differentiated timeline. Every country has a different timeline in terms of its progress, and some of the best plans are often even the best plans are compromised by lack of resources or simple things like governance issues, state to federal relationship, farmer community engagement with the state, with the investors and all that, because everyone has their motives and their work structure as well. I'll stop there for now, and I think we can go.
There's so many intersecting issues that has to be looked at, and I think we're just scraping just the top of the iceberg, really. But perhaps, Prof, perhaps you can maybe share with us a little bit more on the structural issues that are affecting food security in general. Perhaps where are we doing it right, where are we doing it wrong, and in your opinion, where are the probably key places where we should boost efforts?
Yeah, that's a very complex question. If I may, I can look at history for our country. We started with industrial crop. This is the legacy of our colonial masters, because they wanted to help their industrialization program in their country. Therefore, they have planted rubber, and as you all are aware, the area of rubber has declined now to merely less than 900k. And then they have found a golden crop, oil palm, and oil palm has reached 5.9 million hectare and occupied about 75% of agricultural area. And after that, we have cocoa. When we call archetype of overshoot and collapse. It reaches its peak in 1991, and now it has almost gone. So the era of industrial crop is left only for oil palm, and by 2023 it will reach its ceiling of 6.5 million hectare. If the government is serious about this policy of ceiling or limit to area, oil palm area will reach its maximum point, and from there on, I'm not really sure what happened. It may go constant or decline. Yeah, and all of us are aware how well Indonesia is compared to us. So I've always proposed many times to the government that is the best time for us to focus on food first policy. And food, and is very. There's no question about it. It's very important for human capital, human development. It is providing jobs to the poor, to the rural area. It is very good for environment. So when food is done, or is becomes enterprise by the smallholders, they are the best stewards to take care of the environment surrounding their farm compared to estates, because estates, they just wipe up the area and we lost biodiversity and so much fertilizer and so on, right? So what I'm saying is there was a heavy emphasis on industrial crop at the expense of food. And I must say, I was involved in various policies of food policy in Malaysia. They are the best. Most countries give a very good, ratings for our policy. But as mentioned by Puan Salwa, the implementation or delivery is still a problem. If I were to summarize the problem of food sector in Malaysia is that overall, or on average, the yield is very low compared to what has been achieved in Vietnam or in Thailand or even in China. Say, for example, our paddy now has reduced from 4.8 ton per hectare, now is about 3.6 metric ton per hectare, despite the increase in subsidy. So there are other factors affecting yield. So the same thing with other food commodities. Yield is very low, but cost of production has increased, particularly under the crisis. And not only increased, but we are dependent, almost 99% of our cost of input, be it seeds, fertilizer, feedstock for livestock, corn, right? These are material for feedstock, machine parts, pesticide, weedicide, herbicides, all are imported, including labor. So every year, both oil palm, rubber, cocoa, and food, so much billions are being paid or being transferred to other countries. So basically, that is why our margin for food is very low, because we did not improve our yield or productivity, and we did not care enough to produce our own input. Even seeds are imported except for paddy and rice, but seeds for all commodities are imported. The machines, right? And then not mentioning fertilizer except for urea, and the rest of whatever input are all imported. So that is one of the reasons. Of course, there are many other factors. If you want to look deeper into it, say for example, our extension are just way below Vietnam and Thailand in terms of effectiveness. I just want to give one example to you guys. If you look countries like Israel or Holland, you have been to Holland, right? Israel, half of the country is arid land. But due to technology, drip technology or micromanagement of water, as well as input, they were able to be #1 exporter of fresh produce in Europe, just through technology. So land may not be an important factor. What is more crucial is the technology that we have to employ to increase yield. So it's the same for Holland, such a tiny island, but they are, you have been to Holland, they are also the largest producer of livestock, of their own flowers, and of course fresh produce. And not mentioning about Vietnam, when they started their doi moi in 1986, and look at them now, they beat Thailand, they become #1 in the world for rice exports, and then other crops such as coffee, shrimps, and fruits, they are doing very well. And don't forget China too. China, due to their self-sufficiency policy, they are doing very well. They are able to reduce the abject poverty, 500 million people out of the abject poverty and become, enjoy reasonable good living. 500 million is about 75% of the world poverty. That is how China has addressed their own poverty as well as world poverty. So going back to your question, How do we improve our food security? Is by building our domestic capacity in all dimensions. Research and development, innovation, extension, produce our own seed, produce our own fertilizer. May not be 100% because we cannot compete with Syngenta, we cannot compete with Bayer's, but we can produce our own fertilizer based on our biomass, so there are a lot of that. And of course food waste, and we have many researchers. We can produce our machine. Okay, the other thing that I want to mention here is that most of our farmers are small farmers, more than 90%, except for estates, yeah, for oil farm about 40%, but the rest are all smallholders. Think about this. The moment they get out of their farms, when they face their buyers, all of them are big mills, big buyers. So when you are such a tiny farmer facing big mills, rubber, cocoa grinders, oil palm mill, right? A rice milling as big as this hall, they have no bargaining power. I don't know why we don't build small mills for our small farmers. In Japan, the rice mill is as big as the fridge because they have small mills. So if you go and see Alibaba, there are many rice mill, dry mill, small mills for the small farmers. And they even have academy of small machine for small farmers to that extent. So they are tailored towards the need of small farmers. So if we tweak a bit our policy to enhance or to empower our farmers to be smart and to be able to to improve their lives by improving their vertical mobility into value added, have small mills, small gadgets, or whatever small ICTs. There are many available in the world now to help them improve their yield at the same time to reduce our costs through efficiency. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. Oh, what is that? Wow. I am just listening to you say this takes me my breath away. I think essentially what you're saying is it's time to democratize the whole structure, right?
It, yeah.
To not just put too much emphasis on just the big players, the large commercial big boys, but instead to open it up to the smaller players, the
Right.
smallholders.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Prof, for this. This is indeed enlightening. But folks, we will return after this short break. We will come back to unpack a little bit more interesting questions and how we use digital technology, perhaps greater innovations in some of our agro-industry approaches. We'll see you again soon. Hi, welcome back to Let's Talk Food Security. We're going to come back to our discussion this morning, and we'll look at how exactly does food security affect people, and whether our current policies are addressing the issue in its entirety, and whether the solutions that we have in place are sufficient to overcome the challenges that we've been hearing so far. So perhaps I'll start with Prof. Fatima.
Yeah.
So food security affects all of us, it affects people, and perhaps you may be able to share with us how exactly does that affect us?
Food security is an old issue, right? But starting 2020, it has a different dimension altogether, because it's not that we only face food insecurity in some parts of the world, but we are also facing many crises here, multi-dimensional in terms of commodity, as well as multi-dimensional in terms of crisis, right? So in terms of commodity, we saw the price hikes in various commodities that are important for food, right? For example, fertilizer, because of increase in petrol as well as natural gas, and increase in wheat prices, which are affecting price of bread, increase of vegetable oil that will affect the prices of vegetable oils and fats, and all this has affected the not only our import prices, but also our cost of production, and that affect our profit margin to the producers, and therefore the supply of production locally. If we see the data for food import has increased a lot, where we experience about 28 billion deficit, an import bill of 66 billion, which is very high compared to pre-pandemic. And then the other factor that comes together with the price crisis or food security crisis is the inflation, right? Dr. Aniza has mentioned. Because of the pandemic, we suffer a kind of disruption in terms of input, particularly labor movement. And remember, most of our laborers are immigrants, workers, and they have gone back. So the moment endemic happens, we saw that there are not enough laborers. And this has affected billions of dollars to oil palm production, also our food production, yes. And then, and because we have not developed our technological method with farming, we are very, very much dependent on import labor. So at the same time, as mentioned by Dr. Nizat, upsurge of demand, where it's not that we increase our nasi lemak or whatever, but we have diversified our food consumption away from home. We, we were excited to go to holidays, and therefore demand for food away from home in the hotels or in the recreational areas have increased, but supply has remained limited. Therefore, it resulted in inflationary effect domestically. And don't forget, we are also importing from the world. So when we import those items, fertilizer or bread or cereals or meat or fish or dairy products, we are also importing inflation from the world. So double whammy there, inflation from the world as well as local. So when inflation happens, right, and our production is not enough to provide the demand for food locally, and then we are importing inflation, right? These have reduced the real income of consumers, right? And the real income of consumers are pretty bad among the B40. And all of you are aware that 20% of the M40 has slipped into B40, and 10% of T20 has slipped into M40. So basically, 2/3 of our population, because of inflation and food crisis problem, are under B40 now. Of course, we are recovering, but pretty slowly, and this has affected not only the affordability of food, but they are all related: availability, affordability, and nutrition. And UNDP has done a very good study, and they have found out that most of B40 people, particularly in the urban areas, their pattern of expenditure has changed a lot. Yeah, they couldn't afford to buy fresh produce, couldn't afford to buy fruits, and then they they have increased their expenditure on carbohydrate, particularly noodles, by 40%, and they replaced their protein by increasing more eggs and more rice and more noodles and less meat and so on. And of course, they have exposed that 1 in 4 our children are stunted, and one in 10, I remember, undernourished. 1 in 4 in Putrajaya, so in other states are maybe much higher, particularly in Kelantan and so on. So the food crisis as well as the economic crisis has affected availability, affected affordability, and of course nutrition insecurity among our population, particularly the B40 group.
Wow. This is like a chain reaction.
Yes.
You look at the sharp increase in energy prices. You're looking at a price soar in fertilizers, and it doesn't stop right there. And you have food choices because they are seemingly cheaper, but then it will have this effect where there is not enough diversity in the food mix, resulting in lack of nutrition, an imbalance of nutrition amongst children in the B40 group. Now, that's a very stark way of looking at how food security affects us all, affects people in different categories of society. But Dr. Haniza, what do you have to say about how food security affects all of us?
Let me start with the global statistics. Before COVID-19 hit us, the estimated number of food insecure people is about 135 million across the globe. And we estimate that by the end of this year, 2022, it will be 323. So it has gone up 3 times. Okay, we are not talking about eating out ni lagi, Prof. We are talking about, basic food necessity where the consumption, the food gap is very large. And there are various categorization of food insecurity. So when we say food insecure hunger, that means there's a specific measurement of how large the food gap is for the household. And of course, we know that the most affected households are those in the poor group. So how does it affect them on the ground, in reality, in day-to-day life? They can eat, but not consistently eat. So that is also a dimension of food security. It's not just about quantity of food, but the stability of that supply of food or affordability of being able to buy food. So there are days that they can buy, there are days that they cannot buy. Okay, so that's one aspect. The other aspect people will talk about is the safety of the food. Because of the problems with fertilizer, problem with transportation delays, sometimes the storage, air conditioning doesn't work. We also find a lot of cases of food contamination and food safety. And food which is partly contaminated or close to that is often sold to the poor. Again, yeah. We also have issues on gender inequality. If there are household with male and female children, distribution of food, because the male people will go out and work, so they get more food, for instance, and women stay at home and they eat, So there's also issues of early marriages. Because of poverty, children are being, early marriages, and therefore early childbirth. All these require more nutrition by right, but we can see that women are getting less nutrition because of this crisis, maybe partly because of this crisis. So same thing, like maternal health, antenatal health, postnatal health are also affected by poverty when households have to adjust their expenditure patterns to give priority to food instead of other things, instead of health, instead of education. So food security affects us in many, many, many ways. It actually is a factor that perpetuates poverty itself, because when you have children with who are undernourished, who cannot attend school, rate of absenteeism will increase, right? Their attainment of education will also decrease. When they go to school, yes, they go to school, but attainment of the education will suffer, and this just provides fuel to the vicious cycle of poverty. So food security is not, it's an abstract concept that I think affects everyone. So how does the rest of us deal with food security or face security will be different. Maybe I have an element of food security that you don't see. Every one of us might have some elements of how food security, insecurity touches your life or your family's life. You don't see it, but actually it could be present actually in everyone's life. See, so we can go on. I'll let you continue with others.
Thank you, Doctor. It seems that what we are really looking at is food security is the overarching
beyond demand and supply.
It's beyond demand and supply. It's an overarching theme.
Yes.
But what happens as a result of food insecurity or food insecurity, it opens up doors to other social problems, other social related issues, whether they are, especially those in a vulnerable category. Now, Puan Salwa, whether the existing policies that the government has employed or whether the new ones that the government plans to update later on, do you think that it has sufficiently addressed these key challenges that we have discovered? whether there is still room for improvement, whether there will be some kind of incentives on the use of better research and development and maybe better technology to have better buy-in by different stakeholders. Please share with us some of your thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Interestingly, by Dr. Haniza and by Prof. Fatima just now, you mentioned about the food security. So we're talking about food security based in basicness is affordability, accessible, and safety. That's the three main things basically about food security. You mean to say you're able to have the food that you want. If you want to buy chicken, there is chicken in the market, and then you are able to buy it. There is money for you to buy it, and the chicken is safe for you to eat. So that's the basic food security. So the cabinet committee on food security touches on this and more. So first they have the availability cluster, that is basically food, so that food is available for purchase. Secondly is accessibility cluster, and then food safety and nutrition cluster, and then additional two, stability and sustainability, and the other one is strategic communication cluster. Why strategic communication cluster? Because Malaysia is actually a country that produces 17,000 tons of food waste every day. So you how do you see that? At the same time, we are insecure in certain areas, but we are wasting 17,000 metric tons of food every day. So there's need to be a lot more consumer awareness that you need to do more to eat sensibly, to save your food, not have food waste, change the way you eat, eating patterns. Yeah, by research, there are a lot of obese people, and talking about Prof. Fatima said just now, there were undernourished people as well. So we have that in our country. So the strategic communication cluster needs to do the hard work of educating the citizens, the population, that you need to treat your food correctly. You need to, and you have to work together. It's just not the government role to provide you food at cheap prices. It's actually your role to eat moderately, live healthily, and give to those who are assistance to those who are needing assistance. So those are what the committee is trying to address, basically with regards to food security. And it's not just Ministry of Agriculture and Food Industries' role. It's actually cut across all ministries. You're talking about health, is Ministry of Health. Talking about the control of prices to make the prices available and accessible, affordable, that is under the Ministry of Domestic Consumer and Domestic Trade, right? So it cuts across many ministries. So that's what the committee is trying to achieve. And I would like to say, for the committee, they're trying to approach this through three areas. One is trade-based approach, by ensuring easing of imports of products. For example, when we have problems with shortage of chicken, they try to ease the imports of chicken and other vegetables that can come in faster, so that there will be no shortages in the market. And then they try to develop stockpile for staple items. Like we already have stockpile for rice, so that is one thing. And I think they are trying to create another stockpile for chicken and also fish. And then for producer-based approach, they try to assess what is needed by the producers to produce more, have more yield, what assistance. They try to do talent pool, apprenticeship program to encourage CSR by private companies, food loss advocacy, like for hotels, what they're supposed to do with their food waste. And then targeted tax incentive for modernization and digitalization of food systems, such as enhancing feedstock industry. And lastly, strategic communication, I was mentioning just now, is like consumer-based approach by introducing food security advocacy, telling them what you need to do to contribute towards food security. Also by creating the food safety net for those who are really needing food, where they need to go, where can they get assistance, and then enhancing some agriculture in a community by through community. Like you as a community can actually have a plot of land that you can work on and plant your vegetables and get some food back for the community. So those are the kind of things that the ministry is trying to do, the committee is trying to do, but the key word here is everybody has to play their part. Food security is not just by the government but also by the people as also. Thank you.
Thank you, Wan Salwa. We've heard and learned so much just from hearing how one question gets deconstructed, how food security affects us in many different contexts. Thank you, ladies, for such an insightful sharing of the circumstances that we are seeing more in a domestic and at the same time international setting. So we will come back, and just before we will wrap up the session, we'll see you again soon. Hi, welcome back to Let's Talk Food Security. Just to draw back to everyone's core focus, moving forward, what do you think should be done in the short term and the long run in improving what we are seeing around us today, especially maybe closer to home in Malaysia? Let's start with Professor Fatimah.
I'm very optimistic for our country. I hope all of you realize that, of course, Singapore holds a top position in the Global Food Security Index. And Malaysia is now, I think it's number 41, was it 39, yeah? Number 39 now in the Global Food Security Index. But we did not realize that we are much, much richer than Singapore or even Brunei or even Israel. You know why? Because we have vast of land, and modern agriculture doesn't require big land, We have water, we have sunshine, we have river, we have the sea, and we are number 2 in the world with regards to biodiversity. Do we ever care? If you mention any fruits, there are many, many types of fruits under each category. For example, durian, we can list various number of durian. I remember durian tembaga, durian kucing tidur, durian hitam, durian merah, but we did not do much research. We let the Chinese decide, what durian to produce for them. Not mentioning rambai, rambutan, pisang, there are so many varieties. Not mentioning our herbs, they have medicinal value, and these are richness, natural endowment that we have, number 1. Yeah. Number 2, we thank the young generations for various solutions as well as innovation with regards to technological advancement. And we are here, we should capitalize those applications, those solutions, IoT or even blockchain. I'm aware of one incident in one country, Mongolia, where they produce cashmere. You know what cashmere is? A very expensive material, and they use blockchain. So from Mongolia to Europe and so on, they can trace the supply chain, and once they log in, you cannot change. And then in terms of governance, it's very good and very efficient. So if Mongolia could do it, why not us? So we need to capitalize various technological advances to improve yield, to improve efficiency, and of course expand the market. So as mentioned by Wan Salwa, is determination and implementation. Again, I would like to draw upon experiences Vietnam. They are just a war-torn country. In 1986, after turmoil, they just rise up and be number 1 with regards to certain commodities. China, only since after Deng Xiaoping, they have opened up the market, opened up the community, and look at China now. They are doing so well. China could do it. Of course, China is a unique cases, but Israel, Thailand, how much Thailand is different from us? How much Indonesia is different from us? They are about the same, right? in terms of natural endowment, but they are moving fast forward. And of course, Israel, I don't know, I find Israel very unique in the sense that they are the worst located country in the world. Of course, their worst history, but yet they rise up very well purely through technology and cooperative, right? Cooperative even at a young age. Young children, you know, they have to go to Kabush, yeah, through cooperative. They share everything. The farmers also working closely with cooperative as well as scientists. The research method is very easy. Farmer decide the problem statement of research. So they write the problem statement, give it to the scientists. Scientists do the experiment and get the farmers to read up the output, you know, and get their comments and look at the experiments and what are the problems, and that's it. And together with the extension agent. So much we can learn from the outsiders. Please don't be insulated. We think we are middle income. We are not middle income, you know, in terms of productivity or in terms of efficiency of our agriculture. In fact, World Bank is very surprised, Dr. Anissa, that we do well in industrial sector, but our food sector is so miserable. So it's high time that we realize our natural endowments and richness, and also application of ICT and the availability of ICT all over the world, and use them to improve our productivity and therefore our food security. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. That's quite a good list of wish list. Next, Dr. Haniza, what say you?
The global economic outlook for next year is that 2/3 of the country in the world will be facing recession. The global GDP is estimated to fall from 3.2 this year to 2.7 that year. And on the ground, this is going to affect the poor very much, because inequality is also a big source of economic instability and death, of course. So with these numbers, what are the things that we can do immediately? The advice is always to be like, make sure you meet the food needs of your poorest segment. We must halt death coming from just food distribution, you know. So government must step in, correct whatever market failures, make sure that food is on the tables in the poorest households at least. And the other quick response or immediate response is that make sure there is enough cash assistance for the poor, because they cannot be allowed to fall through the cracks because of this crisis. And on a more global scale, on country scale, so we want to see that the domestic supply chain, the parts in the domestic supply chain keep moving. There shouldn't be bottlenecks of inputs or of, you know, of fertilizer, of labor. So we must make sure all the parts keep moving, so that the supply of domestic in the domestic market is still there. Of course, we want countries to also stop imposing export bans. When they impose export bans, we didn't talk about this much just now, but international trade is already an issue. When India, for example, banned export of rice, or let's say, if China or Vietnam ban export of rice, Indonesia has already banned export of palm oil, for instance, right? This has a lot of effect on not just the importing countries, but the countries that import in order to produce downstream products. You know? So the reaction chain is very long and very intense. So we do hope that this kind of matters can be sorted out. And of course, already mentioned by Puan Salwa just now about food wastage, about nutrition choice. These are lifestyle changes that we also want to see in our community. It is definitely a whole of society action, how you educate our parents. If you can see today in the market, processed food is the cheapest, right? And they become the choice of the poor. Not because they like it, but because it is the cheapest, right? So we need to change and bring back the market to where we want it to be, to have more wholesome food and more fresh food on the table. And I think I also like to emphasize again Prof. Fatima's point about supporting the smallholders. Smallholders are our biggest food producers, not the plantations. So therefore, we need to support the smallholders, either farm machines, fertilizers, marketing, anything you name it, because they are actually our food, our food producers, our feeder lah kiranya. Yeah. And I think in terms of technology, we shouldn't just look at sophisticated technology. You know that most technology, as we mentioned before, is very much it's actually cheap, like solar dryer. Solar dryer, solar powered fridge. This can definitely be brought to the remote rural areas of Sabah, Sarawak, Pahang and all that. So there's really no excuse for bringing in technology, no matter how far inland or remote these places are. I hope this will give some food of thought for people, for us, for the industry as well as the government and the community. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Doctor. Quite another long wish list, but I think they are very real. These are very necessary. But also, before we, last but not least, Puan Salwa, what do you think should be done in the short term and in the long run? Your thoughts, please.
I would like to quote what Prof. Fatima said. When we talk about our policies, we have A+. But implementation-wise, it needs the help of all walks of life, all stages, all ministries, the citizens, the population. So we all have to, I think the key word would be food security is a shared responsibility. I've mentioned a little bit just now about what roles we have to play as an individual, as a company, as government. For example, in company perspective, I think we need more investment. We need more take up on R&Ds. We have R&D, we have the technology, the research has been done, but they're just the cost of implementing the change is quite high. So companies more often than not are unwilling to undertake these changes in the way they are doing business. So we need the visionary companies to like step in, lead the way, so that we can change the way we produce agriculture more sustainably and give more yield and give more value to the population. And then we're talking about, like, for instance, as an individual, if you have land and your land is actually being used to produce food, agriculture, don't sell it off. Because there are a lot of temptation nowadays to just sell it off. I don't want to, with the issue of aging farmers, they don't want to focus on agriculture production or food production. It's too much time, or it costs too much, or it's too complicated. So it's your also shared responsibility here that we also need to play a role to continue in food production. Keep your land, keep it for agriculture production. So it takes not just one ministry, it doesn't take just one person, it is the whole ecosystem. So I guess in a nutshell, I would say that we have the players, we have the policies, now it's implementation time. So with that, I would say we all have a role to play for food security in Malaysia. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Puan Salwa. I think we still have many more things to discuss in this topic. I don't think we'll have enough time. 1 hour is certainly not sufficient to address them all, but we think we've covered reasonably well. Looking at the kind of a myriad of problems or challenges or maybe bottlenecks that we've faced, some of the things that we can consider, not just as individuals, not just as governments, even the corporations, individuals that occupy this land. We can learn from others and how with limited resources they can improve. There are ways to overcome these shortcomings, a shift in policy perhaps, a tweak in our implementation, not just having policies but actually implement them and implement them meaningfully. We must have also the realization that having policies itself is not sufficient. We have to apply the right kind of technologies that will allow that enabling environment for us to improve. Dr. Haniza talked about how next year's global economic outlook will not be so great. And given the circumstances that we might find ourselves into, the government must take immediate steps to ensure that there's enough food on the table for the poorest households and ensure that there's sufficient cash assistance to them when they need it. On the domestic front, to ensure that there's enough, that the supply chain on all parts continue, there are no bottlenecks. Otherwise, we're looking at further increase in prices, not just on commodities, but the downstream products, including food. And in a more global scale, I think we should all encourage countries to stop food exports, as there will be more immediate consequences to smaller countries. And of course, Puan Salwa talked about how this is a cross-cutting issue, that not just one government agency is entrusted in ensuring its success or failure. Actually, it is a whole of government approach, if I'm right, to ensure that we have our hearts in the right places, and more urgently to ensure that those in the B40 category do not fall between the cracks and get further left behind. We only have 8 more years before we reach 2030, which is when the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development Goals is supposed to see the global family of nations come together to secure a more sustainable development. But for me though, my only takeaway is this: it's quite apparent that in order for us to devote more attention to ensuring the food systems are in the right place, there is a need for better investments to make that shift to amalgamate technology into better agricultural practices or livestock practices. There is a need for investments, and we're not just talking about the private sector. I know we discussed it, but I think that in a more global scale, I think this is where the developed countries will need to honor their promise. That the developing world will have its own challenges, and developed countries should step up by increasing their ODAs and increasing their assistance for means of implementation for developing countries in various multilateral environment agreements. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I think we've come to the end of our session. We've had a very meaningful session. Thank you, members of the panel. Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Dr. Haniza. Thank you, Puan Salwa. And with that, goodbye. Till next time.